Welcome, sisters, to the podcast, and welcome, Patricia, my favorite Patricia Raybon, to the Open Door Sisterhood podcast again. We're so glad to have you.
Honored, grateful, humbled, and totally delighted to be with you and with everybody who's joining in with us right now. Hello, hello.
Oh, well, I believe that. When I think of you, I do think of humble, and I do think of faithful, and I do think of prayer. And so today we're talking about prayer and what that means to have a life that has a centered soul and how prayer works to help us achieve that. Before we jump in to prayer, why don't you give us the personal details that maybe aren't in your professional bio, but how you spend your days and evenings, who you live with, the 2-minute version.
Oh, okay. Thanks for the question. In fact, for the listeners, right before we came on, I told Alex that I have recently updated my bio that now says that I write faith by day and mysteries by night. So I have started writing now faith and fiction, and am humbled to write for two ministries, you guys, that are important for me to mention. One is Our Daily Bread Ministries, which has readership around the world of about 55 million a month. That's a lot of people looking to find out what must I do to be saved. And so this will be the third time I think we've talked about humility already, but that work is humbling, and but I'm really grateful for it, and so that's part of it. And then the other thing is for the Day Springs and Courage community. And boy, I'm gonna have to drink a little water, just a second. Pardon me, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I never cough. And that's a bad thing during COVID. People give you the oddest looks. You know, get back. But my life has always been about writing. You know that, Alex. I'm a journalist by training, a newspaper reporter by training. And I was thinking about that this morning, that's the one thing I've been blessed to do, is to write or teach about writing. And that's what I'm still doing. So, and I pray that work is blessing and inspiring people, because it inspires me. Very often, you know, I get to write something and I think, boy, I sure needed that. Yeah. Well, and the way with this conversation, I sure needed it. So I'm hoping that our conversation today will be in that mode.
Yes. Well, I know that your writing does impact people, and you are beloved, because anytime I mention your name and people are familiar with your writing, they just gush and gush, and we have a kind of a mutual love fest for you that you don't even know about. But my hope is that more people will pick up your writing, because it is so honest and so beautifully written, and often puts words to feelings that I didn't know how to articulate myself. And the way that you frame it or say it, I think, oh my gosh, that is so true. I've never thought of it that way before. And that's what good writing is, to help us understand ourselves and understand the world better. And you have written a book. It's been a while since it came out, but I Told the Mountain to Move is your memoir on prayer. And I want to talk about that a little bit. But before we do, just give us an overview of what you think of when you hear the word prayer. What does prayer mean to you?
I love this question because the answer usually surprises people. When I think about prayer, I think about the word hour. those two words, you guys, deep, deep, 3 or 4 layers down, share the same root. And so I'm compelled by that idea because, and here, let's just go to the Bible really fast. And we all know the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And, he gets in there with the disciples and then goes off with Peter and the sons of Zebedee and starts to pray with great grief unto death. I think some of the translations say. Then, you guys, he comes back, finds them asleep, and says, couldn't you wait for me just 1 hour? And so the discovery for me that the word prayer and the word hour are cousins. They're kind of kissing cousins. And it's like an invitation for us. It is a reminder to us that good prayer is going to take you a minute. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with a short prayer, but that in at its heart, it is about spending time with God. And so I love offering that as an idea to everybody today, because we tend to move pretty quickly. Even, we're talking about this COVID odd things that the pandemic has done to our concept of time. But when we're talking about prayer, I love the idea of saying, oh, I'm supposed to spend a bit of time here in this. Mm-hmm. And so I love the question that Jesus asked, couldn't you wait for me just 1 hour? I was praying, and that's the minimum of time that it takes. So when I say that, what's your reaction to that?
Well, it's interesting because when you first said hour, I thought you were saying O-U-R, not H-O-U-R. Okay. So anyway, that was surprising because I was like, okay, R, that makes sense, like this is our time together, but you were saying hour. So anyway, interesting. And I would like to hear, you did write the book, and I just love that book. That I told the mountain to move. And you tell about the kind of the story of prayer in your own life. So I would love even to hear how you got to that place and what is the personal story that you tell?
Well, the personal story is that I've been married for 45 years now. And over that time, we've had our share of ups and our share of downs. And so in a very low period in our relationship, my husband, Dan, got deathly ill. And in fact, ended up having emergency brain surgery and was given a 50-50 chance to survive. At the same time, our youngest daughter had left the church and converted to Islam. This was right before 9/11. And I'm sure there were 2 or 3 other things going on in my life, you guys. And I'd go to church and I would see other women and other families, and they all looked pulled together. And my prayers for my situation were not moving any of my mountains. And so at the time, my oldest daughter had a small bookstore in Denver, and I asked her to get me some books on prayer, because it was clear to me that despite growing up in the church from the birth, I grew up on a pew. But despite that, when I needed a mountain to move, my prayers were not doing that. And so I wanted to know, what is it that I don't know about prayer. And that's the backstory. That's how that all started.
Mm. And it is so moving and wonderful. And the reader walks through it with you because you're a beautiful storyteller. Tell us some of those prayer lessons that you learned, those truths you discovered or rediscovered, and which ones have stuck with you as you've continued a life of
Yeah.
faith.
Well, I hope I'm praying right now that these answers in this conversation are speaking to people, because one of the greatest lessons I learned is that prayer is not about getting things. It's about getting changed. And I am aware that that may sound obvious to some people who are listening, but that was not something that I knew. It was not the way I prayed. I was a person who begged in prayer and didn't understand that the first change I needed to make was to enjoy, stop begging, and then take the time, Krista, that hour, to just enjoy being in God's presence. And so there is an intentionality about it that I just didn't understand or didn't know about. I certainly wasn't practicing. And it's not how we live. I mentioned that I write for our Daily Bread, and they had a conference for their writing team a couple of years ago. And so we all went up to Grand Rapids, where their headquarters is, and they put us in a smart room so we could meet with editors, of their editors all over the world. And so these people were saying basically, you guys are very nice, but what people need, they need hope, and they need hope, and they need help. And so in order to do that, I found I couldn't do the kind of writing that provided that unless I spent some time making myself available to help and hope by spending time with God. And it's not us saying anything. It's just sitting to be quiet. And
so, Patricia, I love what you were saying there. And I also recognize that there tends to be a little bit of a transactional expectation when it comes to prayer. And I was just listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about how, we've got young people leaving the church in droves. I mean, statistically, it's frightening, actually, how many young people in just the millennials on down to Gen Z are leaving the church. And this person was saying that often it's rooted in a wound. And so that doubt that comes is often coming out of a place of woundedness, that something didn't happen, right? They prayed for something and the result didn't happen. And so now there's a wound there. And as a result, they're saying, well, forget it. I don't want God, and I don't want the church. And so I thought that was really interesting. And it got me thinking about this transactional approach with God that all of us tend to want and often lean into as truth. And then if it doesn't happen, we become disillusioned. Can you speak to that?
We learn that by functioning transactionally with each other. I did this myself. When Alex asked me to be on the show, right away I'm thinking, okay, what am I doing that I can promote? That's how we function. But prayer is inviting us to shed that instinct and instead just be with people, just be with God. And so the phenomenon of people leaving the church will get corrected as people understand out in the world that that transactional dynamic in the end is not going to satisfy. I mentioned again this my murder mystery that's coming out, but I say it this way because I was praying in the old transactional way. What can I do to get people to know about it? And clearly the Lord was saying, it has nothing to do with that. Here's an opportunity for you to be with people. Get out and pound the pavement, not to sell your peddle your product, but to be with people.
Yeah.
And then
so the presence is the gift, the presence of God or the presence of another.
Yes.
Is the gift and result as opposed to what we want it to look like.
And what we want to get transactionally from it. So what these prayer scholars know that it takes the rest of us so long to learn, is that when we release that pressing after things in order to get things, then we finally start to become who we are all the time, but we've forgotten about. And it's just so good and so rich, and we're not, and it's just really, really special and loving for God to want us to know that about Him, but also about each other. And it's a beautiful thing. And so when the churches that people are leaving become those places again, they'll come rushing back. It's the burden's on us to be those people and to pray in that way. And then and then it's evident that that's who we are, and people feel safe with us. You know, I have I'm a mother-in-law, and I had to learn how to navigate life with my adult children, but also, you know, as a mother-in-law. And what I found if I could just be and not demand and not question and not complain, but just be. Here I am, available. Wow, now I'm actually having a relationship with a son-in-law, actually having a relationship with a husband, you know, with a neighbor. And so you become a place of safety for people. And that is a good thing. That's a God thing to be in the world. And we get that. How do we get that? By spending time. By spending time with the one who made us and loves us more than anybody and anything else.
Mm-hmm. When you at the beginning said that was your definition of prayer, of spending time with God, I automatically thought, oh, so that doesn't necessarily mean talking, because we think of prayer as words often,
right?
But prayer
Alex.
can be an action. It can be being, according to your definition, inviting God into whatever we're doing and wherever we are. And I love the connection between approaching human relationships in the same way, where we remove the agenda, because we tend to be agenda-driven people, and we remove the agenda and invite the person into our life agenda-free. This is what we're doing tonight, and you're welcome to join us, and you don't have to. Or I'm here to help or not. I'm here. And so to remove that agenda, I think both practices help with the other. So the more I do that in my human relationships, the more apt I am to do that in my prayer life as well. And then the more I do that in my prayer life, the more available I am to other people as well. And that
Precisely.
all weaves together. At the beginning of your book, you have the verse from Mark 11:24 that says, "Listen to me, you can pray for anything, and if you believe, you will have it." And so this gets to what Krista was asking a little bit but sometimes God doesn't give us what we're asking for in the way that we're asking for it. He doesn't meet our expectations or our agenda. How do you reconcile that in your own life with reality? Can you give an example of things you have prayed for that have not come to fruition in the way you were wanting, and how that moved you closer to God rather than further, if it did?
Uh, you remember when people would say, we always get an answer from God. Yes, no, or wait, when people used to say it that way. It's still true. And but it takes a while to understand that God's no. Oh wow, it's so good, because that means I didn't go down the path I thought I should be going, or getting the thing that I thought I should be getting, because the Lord sees from the end from the beginning, and the beginning from the end, and his no is going to save me some heartache, some trouble. And in the meantime, I get to keep reshaping the prayer until it finally lines up with the answer that he can affirm. So I love the invitation to keep on praying, because over time, if we're paying attention, the prayer begins to amend itself to sound more like the prayer that God is listening and hearing. In the Psalms, where we see such heartfelt prayers, some of them, David praying over and over. He had a wreck of a family, and praying over and over and over again, but finally coming to a point of saying, but God, you know all about it, and you're going to fix it. I can't see it. And that's certainly true in my family. I have a daughter who has left the church. I can't see how that's going to work out, but I know that God knows about it. And and so I can rest in that, not nag her. I don't have to nag her about that anymore. I pray about it and leave it at his feet, and then I can go out to lunch with her and be a safe person she can spend time with. And so we want these answers immediately. And once we learn to relax at God's pace, there's not any place in the Bible where God's hurrying. And when we get to relax at his pace, then we're okay with how he's working it out. He's working it out, whether or not we can see it or not.
So what would you say to the listener who is asking the question right now? Well, that all sounds great, but I actually don't really know how to pray. It feels very foreign to me. And how do I know if I'm just speaking to my own self or to God, or, it feels very confusing. So do you have some practical ways for someone to start?
Yes, Kristen, I would say if somebody's saying that, that's a great prayer. God, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this prayer is. It sounds pretty raggedy to me right now. And I have this hunger or this need that I have to think that it needs to be right. But it is what it is right now. And I'm gonna believe that's good enough for you? Can I, for the rest of this time, just hang out with you? That's so there's this trust element that that operates. There's also a knowing element. There's that study to show yourselves approved, and I did that in my book. I'm holding it up now. I told the mountain to move. Here's another book because somebody wants a practical lessons. Here's Richard Foster's book called Prayer, and there are probably 20 or 30 kinds of prayer in the book, starting with simple prayer, which is, the kind of prayer that says, I'm lost, I need some help. And then it goes on to all kinds of other kinds of prayers. I'm also, you guys, reading a book called The 7 Sacred Pauses. And this gets us into monastic prayer, where we intentionally think about the hours of the day and how and when and where and how to pause during the hours of the day and just spend a minute being quiet with God. I was telling Alex, I have another friend who's written a book that's coming out soon called 7 Ways to Pray. And that's also comes out of the monastic tradition, which looks at some of the communal monastic practices of prayer. For somebody who really wants to think about what are the some ways to pray and kinds of prayer that are available to me, because there are. When my husband was really sick, I picked up Richard Foster's book because I wanted to know about healing prayer. What does that sound like? And so, in Luke 11, when Jesus, there's that part where the disciples see that when Jesus prays, mountains do move, and they said, "Teach us to pray." So there is that understanding that prayer is something to learn. And then Jesus tells that wonderful parable about, the man who went to his friends by night, asking for bread, and he asked for 3 loaves of bread. And so there's that little lesson woven in that maybe Patricia, maybe Krista, maybe Alex, you're not asking enough in your prayers. So as we get into the prayer scholarship, and as we get into the Bible and all the many lessons where people are praying, we begin to see what prayer looks like and, feels like, and we get okay with the pace of it, and that it's going to slow us down, and
Yeah.
that's all good stuff.
It's interesting that you say that we don't ask for enough, maybe. And I was challenged, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago by our friend Francie Winslow. She said, "You're not asking God for what you really want. And why is that?" And so sometimes when we get into the life of prayer, of talking to God, it gets to some deeper stuff. And part of what our roadblocks are is not wanting to face those things that are keeping us from having honest prayers. Because maybe it is, we don't want to admit what we actually want, or we don't want to come off as greedy, or we don't, there's a million reasons why we may not pray and ask big enough things or specific enough things. And so I'm curious how you would speak to somebody who says, "I'm afraid to get really honest with God." And it may be because of the life I've lived or am living. And if I really believe he's real, he sees what I'm doing or what I'm thinking. How would you encourage someone to get honest in their prayer life?
By getting into the Word. And I mentioned the book of Psalms, but you're not going to find anything more honest than the prayers in the book of Psalms. But the thing that we learn there is that this praying is not about us, it's about the one who can answer. And so there's that reminder that the Lord can do far more than we can think or ask or imagine. We've heard that. But the last part of that says, according to the power that's in him. And so we're over here saying, I'm afraid, whatever we're saying, I understand it. I've been there. But when we get in the Word, we see, oh, this whole business is about him. And there's that place in the book of Lamentations, and I hope it's okay to speak to some of these places in the Word, as we call it. But there is this place in the book of Lamentations where the prophet Jeremiah is complaining and saying all the things we've been talking about. First, my life is a mess. Nothing's going right. And then he comes to that place in the 3rd chapter, he says, where it says he recalls God, recalls him, he brings him to mind. And then he says, oh my gosh, great is your faithfulness, God. This isn't about me. This is about you who provide these fresh mercies every morning. And when we as people and as door openers and as women, when we start recalling God for people, then they can say, that's right, I haven't been asking God enough. There's nothing he cannot do. And so show me that big prayer I'm supposed to ask God. And I know it's going to scare me like crazy, but show it to me and help me to get it out of my mouth.
Yeah,
Because it's all about what you can do.
That's great encouragement. Well, in our last few minutes, Patricia, what would you say to our listeners as they're looking at this idea of, I want to have a centered soul. I want to stay rooted and grounded in, that inner place. And I want to feel like I'm at peace there. How would you encourage people toward prayer as they're looking toward that goal of a centered soul?
If they're serious about that, they will concede that the one who is in charge of it all is the one to seek. Seek first the kingdom of, seek him. Every answer is he holds. And, I know, I guess I'm supposed to be here and say something else, but there is no other answer. I mentioned Jeremiah. There's this minor prophet Habakkuk who's doing the same self-doubt. And then finally he says, wait a minute, God. And he has somebody said, what's your theology? And I said, even though there are no figs on the tree, there are no grapes on the vine, sheep in the field, there's no cattle in the barn, even though there's racism, even though there's every wrong thing in the world going on. Yet I rejoice in God, the source of my salvation. Habakkuk has this epiphany. He makes my feet like hinds feet, like, sure-footed, so I can walk over these other things, all the messes in my life, all the obstacles and all the problems and all my gripes and all the churches that aren't churching right. And he lets me walk over that because he is my strength. And finally, when we get there, then a whole lot of our questions about prayer starts to feel more resolved.
Well, thank you so much for
Is that
coming
too
on.
Is that too churchy, you guys?
No, that's wonderful. And thank you for coming on today, Patricia, and for just sharing your experience with prayer and your journey. And each one of us has our own journey with prayer. And that makes sense because we each one have an individual relationship with God. And we work it out in that individual
and
relationship.
He can meet each of us at the same time in all of our differences because he made us. It's pretty amazing.
It's really beautiful. Well, if people want to read more about you, find out more about you and what you're doing, where can they do that?
Run over to patriciaraybon.com, and there's a place there you can join my faith journey. That's what I call it. We have a good time getting together. And so I welcome anybody who wants to connect that way.
Great. Well, thank you, Patricia. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.